We look forward to what God's continuing to do. What time is it? Anybody got an idea what time it is? My watch says, you know what my watch says? Tick, tock, tick. No, it don't even say that anymore. It's electric. It goes click, click, click. But I can't hear it. And right now it is 3 minutes after 11. Right now. Everybody agree with me? Okay. Anybody, you agree with that? Okay, go ahead and get out your cell phones and check your time then. Some of you don't even carry a watch anymore, do you? What time is it? 11:30. It's no way. Come on, you're not going. I was born at night, but it wasn't last night. Let me tell you, honey. Okay. What time in your life is it? Well, I think if we looked at our watches or cell phones, or if you listen to some people who's wanting to get out of church, we would all have a little different perspective on it, wouldn't we? Just like our watches are a little bit different, I got all this GPS stuff and all that, and you can kind of get on the time, and it's exciting. Brenda got me, I think it was a couple years or last year, one of those GPS clocks, where you can put in the house, a nuclear clock where it gives us the time, it gives me the temperature, and it gives me everything, all of that information that, I maybe don't want to know sometimes. But, it's kind of interesting, in our society today, but it's almost inevitable that if we all look at our watch, we realize that maybe the time that we're going by is a little different than other people, isn't it? And all of us move in that way just a little bit, don't we? Some things about time that we understand. Time is a great mystery, isn't it? All of us are in constant contact with time, whether we realize it or not. We talk about it, we live our lives and its constraints, but we never quite understand or to be able to define exactly how time gets away. Some of us, wow, it can't be that time. Time just got by so quickly. And then some of you in class, particularly some of our students, will say, it can't be just then. And some of you, it never bothered me when a person looks at their watch at church. But when they start taking it off and shaking it and listen, see if it's still right. Now that bothers me a little bit, so don't do that to me this morning, right? Okay? So we all live in its constraints, we have to be places. And all the time-saving things that we have in our life, yet we're always in a hurry, and we're quite often not on time with those things. Thank you, Joe, for getting those. Your pastor forgot to bring those in this morning. But time is more than just an event, isn't it? It's an experience. It's more than just an experience, though, isn't it? It relates to different states of being. When we look at time in the narrow constraints that we talked about a moment ago, we were talking about a time on a day, a particular one. But all of us live it in a much broader sense than that. And in a state of being, we all have a past, don't we? I think most of you lived yesterday, didn't you? Anybody here that didn't live yesterday? If you didn't live yesterday, you're not living today. I want you to know that, okay? There's a problem here. And all of us have today. And if God wills, we're all going to have what? Tomorrow, aren't we? And we live within those constraints, and we look at those, and we have a past, a present, and a future. Time has been compared to a swift river that flows along, carrying with it the moments and the events and the experiences of our life. Isn't that kind of a neat way of looking? I like that quote. It's like a river flowing along. Now, you can kind of slow down a river by damming it up, but it'll keep piling up and it'll overflow on it. Life is like that. It does go on. And even during the difficult events of our life, sometimes we find that life does go on. Time as we know it is not eternal, though, is it? You say, wait just a minute, Dale, you talk about eternal life a lot. And absolutely, but I just mentioned that. Time as we know it is not eternal. All of us have a time, and it's somewhere on a birth certificate someplace when you were born. And if you live long enough and God doesn't come after his children, because they're not going to be able to bury us because they can't find us at that time. But the reality is that all of us one day will die. Time will only continue as we know it until God says that's enough. Stop. That's it. So the question really becomes, knowing the constraints, the availability of time, how are you dealing with the time in your life? How are you dealing with the time and the moments that you do? We're probably one of the greatest things that we do is kill time, right? Have you heard somebody say, I'm just killing time, Well, that's not an avenue anymore very easily because we're driven by so much time. And the reality of it is that time in your life is limited. Any of you have said, man, I've just got too much time on my hands? We're always driven by never having enough time to accomplish the things that we want to accomplish. We have difficulty with that. But we are defined by its limitations, aren't we? You know, sometimes we try to eat at certain times of day. Sometimes we try to sleep at certain times of day, although that sometimes gets a little muddled. We have times that we have to go to work. If you still clock in, you may have to clock in at your time, at your work. If you don't, things are not getting done. People live, though, as they're going to live forever. Have you ever noticed that? I dealt with that puzzling thing one day. I thought, wow, why do we do that? Because even in my job at the hospital, and now I deal with that, you know, people are always planning tomorrow, but yet the reality, the Bible says that if we're wise about that, we would say, that, you know, if God's will, we will do this or that tomorrow. We will plan our time accordingly. But the reality is that we cannot live here on this earth this way forever. Inevitably, something will happen that we cannot do that with. If you want to look at the reality of it, you remember the children of Israel that wandered for 40 years in a wilderness because they refused to be obedient to God? Moses had led them out and across the Red Sea. Then they decided, well, listen, you know, God was going to enter the promised land way before that 40 years. But the children of Israel decided to listen to 10 people who didn't have faith that said there's giants in the land. We can't do it. Only 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, said, God's given it to us. Let's take the land. The children of Israel said, let's don't do it because we're scared. We want to live the time of our life the way we want to. And then what happened is that God performed a curse upon them and said, listen, every one of you of adult age and on, except the 2 of faith, will not be able to enter the promised land. For the next 40 years, they wandered in the wilderness. Do you realize, according to some mathematicians, and I didn't figure this out myself, I read this not long ago, that there were approximately 90 people a day that died while they were wandering in the wilderness. That would have been the average. I'm sure some days it would have been 80 and some days it might have been 100, you know. We don't know. But the reality is that there were people every day, and it's just like that in our life. You know what this brought Moses? He was leading the children of Israel and understood the power of God and understood the disobedience of individuals. This brought Moses to reflect upon that in Psalms 90, verses 1 through 6. Because he reflected on it in this way when he said that God is everlasting, while man is like grass, who springs up just for a little while. And when the sun comes and the water dries up, it's quickly withered and goes away. Boy, whenever it rains, we got to mow grass, don't we? Back this spring when it was raining a lot, you know, sometimes we'd have to mow it a couple times. And now, you know, sometimes you have to wait a little while if it's dry. And if it burned up, you wouldn't have to, because just as it tells us, as the sun comes up and bakes the ground and the moisture doesn't come, that grass is not eternal, is it, folks? Just crabgrass. For the reality of it is it happens. And that's what Moses reflected upon. Ken Boa wrote it this way: because many people do not have an eternal perspective, their values are reversed. They are reversed. Refusing to face the questions about eternity. They are hurrying as quickly as they can to oblivion, stopping on the way to build monuments that crumble and are soon forgotten. People are preoccupied with the false gods of success because they have not learned the wisdom of laying up for themselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. Catch that? I read that to you because I didn't want to misquote him. Too many of us are caught up in the pressures of everyday living. And we live as fast as we can, and we live as much as we can, and we're pushed by all of these things, and we've got all these modern conveniences that are supposed to help us get more done and easier, but sometimes they simply constrain us. Matter of fact, it takes me longer to figure out how to operate the DVD player than it did to just, you know, watch something else, you know. And all of those things, and now we've got it where, and I don't have one of those, by the way, if you've got cable and some of those things, which you can actually just stop it, fast forward it, or back it up while you're watching live TV, you know, and there it is. It's amazing, some of those buttons. My fingers just don't work on those like that.